She was just a young girl, no cameras, no crowds, just her and the drill. A royal guard watched from the shadows. He had seen kings train, he had seen soldiers fall, but he had never seen anything like this. Lady Louise, the king's niece, was alone on the field. She did not know anyone was watching, and that made what happened next even more powerful. This is a story about quiet strength, about a girl who chose duty over comfort, about a moment that moved a royal guard to tears. Stay with us, this story will stay with you too. St. Andrew is a quiet town in Scotland. Lady Louise studies there. She is the king's niece, a royal but a very quiet one. One cold morning something happened. A royal guard saw something he never forget. That is the story. Please subscribe to this channel. We tell real royal stories every week.
The field was empty. That was the first thing Sergeant David Marsh noticed when he stepped outside that morning. The wide, flat training ground behind the old stone building was completely still. The grass was wet with dew. The sky was pale gray. A cold Scottish wind moved through the trees at the edge of the field. It was 6:45 in the morning. No students came out this early. Not in October. Not in St. Andrews, where the wind came in from the sea and cut through every jacket like a knife. David had been a royal guard for 11 years. He had served at Buckingham Palace. He had stood outside doors in freezing rain for hours without moving. He was used to silence. He was used to stillness. But something made him stop walking that morning. Something on the field. A figure. Small, alone. Moving, he squinted through the gray morning light. The figure was standing at the far end of the field. Straight back. Head up. Arms at the sides. And then movement. Precise, controlled. Step, turn, hold. Step, turn. Hold. David knew that movement. He had done that movement 10,000 times in his career. It was the King's Drill, the formal ceremonial march used by the Household Division. The most disciplined, most demanding march in the British military tradition. It was not something civilians learned. It was not something you found on YouTube and copied in a field. It took months to learn correctly, years to perfect. David walked closer, slowly. He did not want to interrupt. He was not even sure what he was seeing. And then the figure turned, just slightly, and the pale morning light caught her face. He stopped walking. He knew that face. Lady Louise Windsor, 19 years old. Daughter of Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. Niece of King Charles III, a student at the University of St. Andrews, living quietly, studying English literature, doing her best to be normal. She did not see him. She was focused entirely on what she was doing. Her eyes were fixed on a point in the distance, the way soldiers are trained to look. Not at the ground, not around. Straight ahead, focused, disciplined. Her arms moved in perfect time. Her steps were measured. Her posture was exact. David had trained new recruits for 3 years of his career. He knew the difference between someone going through the motions and someone who truly understood the drill. He knew the difference between performance and dedication. What he was watching was dedication. Real dedication. The kind that only comes when no one is watching. She did not know. He was there. She thought she was completely alone, and she was still doing it. Perfectly. He stood at the edge of the field for a long moment. The wind moved through the grass. A bird called somewhere in the trees. The morning was still and cold and quiet. And he watched Lady Louise Windsor run the King's Drill, her grandfather's drill, her uncle's drill. The drill of every British monarch alone on a wet field at 6:45 in the morning with nobody watching. And no one to impress. He felt something shift in his chest. Something he had not expected to feel. He had seen royals at official events. He had stood guard at ceremonies where princes and princesses smiled for cameras and waved to crowds. He had seen the performance of royalty many times, but this was not a performance. This was something else entirely. This was a young woman, alone in the cold, practicing the traditions of her family, not because anyone asked her to, not because anyone was watching, but because she believed it mattered. David took a slow breath. He did not move. He did not speak. He just watched, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a question was forming, one he could not yet answer. How long had she been doing this? And more importantly, why? Louise did not stop. She had been on the field for 30 minutes already, but her body did not show it. Her shoulders stayed level. Her chin stayed up. Her steps stayed clean and even on the wet grass. She had learned long ago that the drill was not about the body. Not really. The body was just the instrument. The drill was about the mind, about focus, about choosing over and over to stay present and precise even when every part of you wanted to drift. Her father had told her that once. A long time ago, she had been maybe 12 years old. They were walking through the garden at Bagshot Park, just the two of them on a Sunday afternoon. Her father, Prince Edward, had stopped by the old stone wall near the rose beds and stood very still for a moment. He had served in the military. He had tried and struggled and ultimately left, and she knew that story. The one the newspapers liked to bring up sometimes. But what the newspapers never wrote about was what he had kept. What had stayed with him? The part of that training that had never left his body, even decades later. He turned to Louise that afternoon and said something she never forgot. He said, "The drill teaches you that discipline is not punishment. It is a gift you give yourself." She had not understood it then. She was 12. She wrote it down in her journal that night because it sounded important. But it was just words. Now she understood. She turned at the far end of the field and began the sequence again from the top step. Hold, turn. Arms, eyes forward. Her boots were damp. The grass had soaked through at the toes. She could feel the cold rising up through the soles. The wind came in from the east and pushed against her left side. And she adjusted, barely, the way she had learned to do. She had started practicing the drill in the summer, not because anyone asked her to, not because it was required or expected. She had started because she found an old video archived footage from 1953, her great-grandmother's coronation, and she had watched it 6 times in one night. She had watched the guards move, the precision, the silence, the gravity of it, and she thought, this is what it means to carry something carefully. She had felt it in her chest. Watching that footage, something old and deep, something that connected her to people she had never met, to moments she had never seen, to a line of duty that stretched back further than she could imagine. She was not trying to be a soldier. She was not trying to prove anything to anyone. She just wanted to understand, to feel in her own body what that kind of discipline felt like, what it meant to move with intention, with respect, with care. So she had looked it up. She had read every guide she could find. She had watched footage of the trooping, the color ceremonies, pausing and rewinding, studying the angle of the arms, the length of the stride, the exact moment of the turn. And then she had come out to this field. Early in the morning, before anyone else was awake, she had stumbled at first. Her timing was off. Her arms were wrong. She nearly stopped 3 times that first morning, convinced it was too complicated, too precise, too tied to a training she had never received. But she came back the next day. And the day after that, over weeks, something changed. The movements began to feel less like instructions and more like memory, like something her body was slowly recognizing rather than learning for the first time. She could not explain it. She just knew that out here, alone, in the cold morning quiet of St. Andrews. She felt closer to her family than anywhere else, closer to her father, to her grandfather, the late Duke of Edinburgh, to all of them at the edge of the field. Sergeant David Marsh still had not moved. He was watching her make the turn for the fourth time, and he was no longer just curious. He was genuinely moved.
The guard makes a big decision. He steps onto the field. He walks towards Louise. She sees him. She is calm, not scared. He tells her, "Your deal is correct." But Louise surprises him. She says, "My second turn feels wrong. Can you help me fix it?" He watches her carefully. He tells her the small mistake. She tries again. This time it is perfect. Two strangers, one cold field. Something special just began.
David Marsh was not an emotional man. He would have told you that himself. His colleagues would have agreed. 11 years in royal protection. 3 years training recruits. A man who had learned early in his career to keep his face still and his feelings quieter. But standing at the edge of that wet field, watching Lady Louise Windsor run the King's drill alone in the gray morning light, something in him was breaking open, quietly, like a door pushed gently from the inside. He had served under the late Duke of Edinburgh briefly, early in his career, just for a few months at the tail end of the Duke's public duties. He had never spoken to him directly. That was not how it worked. Guards stood. They observed. They protected. They did not speak unless spoken to. But he remembered the Duke's presence, the weight of it, the sharpness, the way Prince Philip could walk into a room and every person in it would straighten instinctively, without knowing why. And now he was watching the Duke's granddaughter move across a field, alone, in the cold, performing a drill that the Duke himself would have known, would have done, would have valued. The connection hit David somewhere. Behind the ribs, he made a decision. He stepped forward onto the grass. His footstep was quiet, but Louise heard it immediately. Her head turned. Her body stiffened, just slightly, the natural reaction of someone who believed they were alone and suddenly discovered they were not. She saw him and blinked. He stopped walking. He stood at a respectful distance. He did not salute. This was not a formal moment, but he straightened instinctively, the way he always did in the presence of a member of the royal family. "I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am," he said quietly. His voice was steady, careful. Louise studied him for a moment. She was not frightened. She had grown up around protection officers, around guards, around quiet men in dark coats who stood near doorways. She had learned to read them quickly. This one was not a threat. That was clear. He looked. She searched for the right word. Moved. That was it. He looked moved. "You've been watching," she said. It was not an accusation, just an observation. "I have," David said. "I apologize. I didn't want to interrupt your practice, but I..." He paused. He was not sure how to say what he wanted to say. He was not used to saying things like this. "I wanted you to know that what you're doing, what I just watched, it was correct. The drill, the form, it was correct." Louise looked at him for a moment. "You know the drill," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Household division. 11 years. Something shifted in her expression. The slight wariness she had first shown dissolved into something more open, more curious. "I've been trying to get the turn right," she said. "The second turn. My timing is off by just a fraction, I think. I can feel it, but I can't fix it." David blinked. He had not expected that. He had expected a polite thank you, a small smile, a quiet dismissal, the way royals often ended unexpected conversations. He had not expected her to immediately return to the problem she was working on. "May I?" he said carefully. She nodded. He stepped a little closer. He watched her run the sequence, just the turn section. And she was right. She was correct about herself. The timing on the second turn was landing a quarter beat late. Not enough for an untrained eye to catch. Enough to feel wrong, he told her. She nodded slowly, like someone who had suspected as much and was relieved to have it confirmed. Again. She said she did not wait for his answer. She stepped back, reset her position, and ran the turn again. This time, it was clean. She stopped, stood still, breathed. Yes, she said quietly, mostly to herself. David Marsh stood on the wet grass, in the cold morning air, and said nothing. Some moments did not need words. They stood in silence. For a moment after that, the wind moved through the grass between them. Somewhere across the field, a lone seagull drifted past, riding the cold air without effort. The town of St. Andrews was waking up somewhere beyond the stone walls, the distant sound of a lorry on the high street. A door closing. The day beginning, but here, on this field, time felt different. How long have you been practicing? David asked. Since July, Louise said. She looked at the far end of the field. 3 mornings a week, sometimes 4. I come early, before anyone else is out. Why? He asked. And then, realizing how direct that sounded, he added, if you don't mind my asking. She was quiet for a moment, not defensive, just thinking. Choosing the right words the way careful people do. My grandfather died when I was 17, she said. I was old enough to understand what that meant, old enough to understand what he had given, what he had carried. 60 years beside my grandmother. 60 years of service. She paused. People always talked about what he gave up, the career he set aside, the life he might have had, but I don't think he saw it that way. She glanced at David briefly. I think he saw it as something worth carrying, something he chose. David did not speak. He was listening in the careful way he had spent years practicing, completely still, completely present. I'm not a soldier, Louise continued. I don't have a regiment. I don't have a formal role yet. I'm just a student, a small pause. But I wanted to know what it felt like to carry something with that kind of discipline, to do something that requires you to be completely precise, completely present, completely focused, not for applause, but just because it matters. She looked down at her boots for a moment. The wet grass. The damp morning. The drill is the closest I could find to that feeling, she said. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am, David said. And he meant it entirely. He thought about the Duke again. About those few months he had served nearby. He had watched Prince Philip move through the world with a kind of contained energy, always purposeful, always exact, never soft in a careless way. There had been a gravity to him, a weight, not heavy in a sad way, heavy in the way that old, important things are heavy. He was seeing that same quality now in the Duke's granddaughter. It was not something you were born with, he thought. It was something you practiced, something you chose, morning after morning. In the cold and the quiet, when no one was watching. He would have liked seeing this, David said quietly. Louise looked at him. He felt suddenly that he had stepped over a line, said something too personal, too much. He was a guard. She was a royal. There were boundaries. There were proper ways things were done, but she did not look offended. She looked like someone who had just been given an unexpected and very gentle gift. Her eyes went bright for a moment, just briefly. The way eyes do when something true is said that the heart already knows. Thank you, she said. Her voice was steady, but quiet. They stood there another moment. The morning was getting lighter now, the gray sky shifting slowly towards silver. In an hour, the field would be full of students heading to early lectures. The town would be fully awake. The quiet would be gone, But right now, it was still just the two of them. A guard who had served for 11 years and a young woman who was learning what it meant to carry something carefully. "Will you come again tomorrow morning?" David asked. She looked at him. There was the faintest trace of a smile. "I come every morning," she said. She reset her position at the edge of the field, head up, shoulders back, eyes forward, and she began again. David watched her go. And he knew, without knowing why, that this was not the last conversation they would have. Something had started on this field. He just didn't yet know where it would lead.
A beautiful routine begins. Every morning Louise comes alone. She practices quietly. Then the guard arrives. He watches, he waits. If she has a question, she asks. He answers. That is all. One morning Louise asks, "What was my grandfather really like?" The guard says, "He made standing still feel important. Every moment had a purpose." Louise listens carefully. Then she says, "That is what I want. The real things, not just the ceremonies. But something big is coming, something unexpected."
He came back the next morning. He told himself it was routine. He was assigned to the university grounds for a security assessment that week. It was entirely professional, entirely reasonable for him to walk past the training field at 6:45 in the morning. But when he turned the corner and saw her already there, already in position, already moving, he stopped pretending it was just routine. He had come back because that conversation had stayed with him. Because what he had witnessed the day before had quietly rearranged something inside him that he hadn't even known needed rearranging. He stood at the edge of the field again. This time, Louise saw him immediately. She finished the sequence she was running. She did not stop halfway. She completed it fully, the way proper discipline demands, and then she turned and walked toward him. "Sergeant," she said. "Ma'am," a pause. The wind, the cold light. "The transition from the hold to the forward step," she said. "I watched footage last night. I think I'm holding a fraction too long before the step. It's breaking the rhythm." She demonstrated the section in question, slowly, half speed. David watched carefully. She was right again. The problem was small, technical, and she had identified it entirely on her own by watching archival footage in her student room the previous night. He felt a deep, quiet respect move through him. "You're right," he said. "The hold is clean, but you're giving it one extra beat. The step should come on the same count as the release, not after." She nodded. Tried it again. On the third attempt, the rhythm clicked into place. He could see it, could see the moment her body found the timing. Her movement changed subtly. The drill stopped looking like something she was performing and started looking like something she simply did. That was the moment. That specific morning, that was when David Marsh understood that Lady Louise Windsor was not dabbling. She was not doing this as a hobby or a curiosity. She was doing this with the same quiet seriousness that she seemed to bring to everything in her life. Over the following 2 weeks, they developed a quiet routine. She would arrive at 6:30. She would work alone for the first 20 minutes, running sequences, self-correcting, building muscle memory. He would arrive around 10 to 7 and stand at the edge of the field. She would acknowledge him with a small nod. He would watch. And when she had a specific question, she would ask it. He never instructed her uninvited. She never asked for more than she needed. It was the most disciplined and respectful learning exchange he had ever been part of. On the 5th morning, she asked him about the Duke. Not his public life, not the things you could read in a book. She asked what it had felt like to be nearby, what kind of presence he had. David thought carefully before answering. "He made you feel," he said slowly, "that standing still was a profound act. That being present, completely present, without fidgeting or drifting. That was a form of respect, a form of service. Louise listened with her full attention. He never wasted a gesture. David continued. Every movement had a purpose. And I think when you serve that long, when you practice that kind of discipline that long, it stops being effort. It becomes simply who you are. Louise was quiet for a moment after that. Then she said, "That's what I want, not the ceremony. The underneath of it, the real thing." The wind came in off the sea, and the trees at the edge of the field shivered. David looked at this 19-year-old woman standing in the cold, morning light with wet boots and perfect posture, and said nothing. Because there was nothing to add. She already understood it. She already had it. She just did not know yet how the world was about to find out. Because on the following Thursday morning, something happened that neither of them expected, and everything changed. It was a Thursday. The sky was still dark when Louise arrived at the field. She had woken before her alarm, the way she always did now. Her body had adjusted. 6:15, eyes open, no struggle. As if her body had quietly decided that this was important enough to wake up for. She laced her boots. She pulled on her coat. She went out into the cold. The field was dark and still. The floodlights on the far buildings cast long, pale shadows across the grass. Her breath came out in small clouds. She found her position at the edge of the field and stood for a moment. Eyes closed, the way she always started, still. Then she began. She did not hear the footsteps at first. She was too focused, but David heard them. He arrived at 7 to find a group of 4 people standing at the edge of the field, watching. 3 students with phones, and 1 older man in a heavy green coat standing slightly apart from them, very still. Watching with an expression that David could not immediately read. He recognized the man after a moment. A retired colonel, a well-known figure in military circles, occasionally called upon as a ceremonial consultant to the palace. David had seen him at official events, formal, precise, a man of old standards and high expectations. The colonel was watching Lady Louise Windsor run the king's drill. He was not moving. He was not speaking. He was simply watching with the complete, careful attention of someone who understood exactly what they were seeing. Louise finished the sequence. She turned at the end of the field. Her eyes swept the edge and she saw the small group. The students with their phones. The older man. She did not freeze. She did not flush or look away. She stood still for a moment. Then she walked across the field toward them at a calm, measured pace. The students looked slightly nervous. They had clearly not expected her to approach. She looked at them gently. "Good morning," she said simply. Not unkind, not sharp. One of them lowered his phone. "Sorry," he said. "We weren't trying to. It's all right," she said. And then she turned to the older man in the green coat. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was serious. The kind of serious that was not cold but very, very focused. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "On my own," Louise said. "Archival footage. Reference materials." And she glanced briefly at David, who was standing at a respectful distance, some guidance. The colonel was quiet for a moment. "The second march sequence," he said. "Do it again." It was not a request. It was not rude. It was simply the way men like him asked things. With the assumption that precision was possible and expected. Louise looked at him. Then she turned, walked back to the starting position, and ran the second march sequence clean, measured, perfect. When she finished, she turned back to face him. The colonel nodded. Once, slowly, the way someone nods when a thing has been confirmed, that they had already half believed. "Your grandfather," he said quietly, "was the finest ceremonial presence I ever witnessed in 60 years of service. He paused. That does not pass through bloodline. It passes through character, through choice. Another pause. You have made that choice. Louise did not speak immediately. She held the moment carefully, the way someone holds something fragile. Thank you, she said at last. Her voice was level and quiet and completely composed. The colonel nodded again. He pulled his coat a little tighter against the morning cold. Then he turned and walked back toward the stone buildings, unhurried, as if he had simply gone for a morning walk and happened to see something worth noting. The students had already drifted away. The field was quiet again. David stood at the edge of the grass and watched. Louise stand alone in the pale morning light. She was still, eyes forward, shoulders level, and in that silence, that simple, ordinary, extraordinary silence, she looked, every inch her grandfather's granddaughter. She looked royal, not because of her name, not because of her bloodline, not because of any title, but because she had chosen, morning after morning, in the cold and the quiet and the dark, to carry it. And she never put it down.
That is the story of Lady Louise, a young woman, a quiet morning, a powerful moment. She did not do it for the cameras. She did not do it for the crowd. She did it because it mattered to her. And sometimes that is the most royal things of all. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who loves the royals, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. We read every comment. So tell us what surprised you most. New story coming very soon. Until then, take care of yourself and remember, real greatness is always quiet.